So thanks for joining. I'm Jeff Dobines, and so appreciate everybody making the time. We're going to cover a lot, but we're going to do it pretty efficiently, and so grateful for everybody to get on. We have the team from Hope for Justice. They're really the leader in the international anti-human trafficking world, and I'm thankful to have Drew, who's our local leader, and Richard, who's the U.S. team lead. So Hope for Justice, they're a global organization, but their U.S. headquarters is here in Nashville. And I just want to share, my wife and I got involved with this a couple of years ago, and to be honest, Amy, my wife, couldn't believe that this was really happening. She was almost just didn't think it was real, because she just couldn't get her head wrapped around how serious something like this is, and that it actually happens in the United States. It makes sense maybe that it happens in these third world countries or in Asia, but the fact that it's happening in like Antioch and Nashville and Franklin is hard to really understand. So we've gotten involved and kind of rolled up our sleeves to get educated on this, and I think all of us can do our part to make an impact. And I just know if it was my kids, I'd want the Hope for Justice team to get involved. And so these are somebody's kids, and so we're thankful for the work that you guys are doing. It's not easy work, and I know it's painful, but it's super important. So I said we're going to keep it light, and then we've already gotten serious within about 15 seconds into this. So it is serious. So I'm gonna pass it over to Drew. Drew's been a dear friend for several years and does an awesome job. He's been in this space for 15 years, and it's kind of our local boots on the ground, and he's going to introduce Richard. So appreciate everybody. We're going to have Q&A at the end. So, down there at the bottom, if you have questions, hit the Q&A button. We'll get to those after Richard's done. But Drew, take it over for a second. Introduce Richard, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining, everyone. And thank you to Jeff and the team at Southwestern for providing the platform for this important topic. It's hard to find the words to talk about the point of today, but we must. We're here to talk about things that are, quite frankly, very difficult to talk about, with predators, exploitation, modern slavery, abuse, human trafficking, child trafficking. None of this is good. But I'm here because if I know nothing else, I know that the first thing that every person must do to create genuine change is very simple. You got to show up. And that's what you all did today. You showed up. Awareness leads to action, and action leads to change. If you're anything like me, before I got into space, I didn't realize how bad the problem of human trafficking truly is, internationally or locally. But joining Hope for Justice and learning about the realities of modern slavery changed me. And we're going to hear about those brutal realities and this heavy, hard-hitting stuff. And it demands our attention and dedication to remember that the human beings in these cases and these statistics, every number has a name, and every name matters. So let's learn more. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Richard Schoborough. He has over 25 years of law enforcement experience, including positions throughout his career with the FBI and National Counterterrorism Center. He served in a variety of positions, ranging from supervisory special agent at the FBI's headquarters in DC to the unit chief of the International Terrorism Operations Section in Langley, Virginia, and the European Union. He's investigated violent crime, international terrorism, terrorist financing, human trafficking, and organized crime. He's authored numerous articles on criminology and terrorism, and serves as a media contributor for Fox News, CNN, PBS, NPR, and other major international networks. And he's currently a research professor of criminology and homeland security. And he leads Hope for Justice's investigative efforts across North America. Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Drew, for that. I appreciate it.
Hey, Richard, I'm going to stop you real quick because I screwed up something. We're going to also we want to raise awareness, but we also have a need kind of financially that you guys are looking for. So at the end, we're going to have an opportunity to raise a little bit of money for this project that they have a dire need for. And through Southwestern, we're going to match those grants that we raised today. So be thinking about that a little bit, because there's some serious needs, and we're not going to cover them all today, but at least we can make a dent in what they're trying to accomplish. So I forgot to mention that, Drew, so sorry. All right, Richard, run with it. Thanks.
Hey, listen, thanks for having Hope for Justice here, and I appreciate everybody showing up to listen to this important topic, because it's like Drew said, awareness leads to identifying victims, and through awareness, we're going to educate you on how to do it. It's going to be taking a little bit of a drink through a fire hydrant today, giving you all of this information that we've got, but I want to make sure that I give you enough information that if you see something, say something. And I know that gets a little bit redundant when it comes to everything, but I always tell people, what should I do if I think somebody is a trafficking victim? And I always tell them it's better to say something and had been wrong than not have said something and had been right. So a little bit about Hope for Justice. And we are a global organization, as Jeff mentioned. We're 30 plus locations across 5 continents. Our U.S. headquarters is in the United States. What we do is we seek to end modern day slavery through preventive efforts, much like what we're doing today, raising the level of awareness through educational platforms. Rescue victims, we have teams of retired law enforcement officers and agents across the U.S. who are licensed private investigators who actually go out and bridge that gap and work human trafficking cases alongside law enforcement, alongside prosecutors. We work these cases and present them for prosecution. We seek to rescue these victims and identify those who are most vulnerable. We also look to restore lives. Trafficking victims run the spectrum of trauma. So we look to get them back on their feet and put them into integrating programs through our community outreach efforts. And then also too, through reforming society. When we say reforming society, we mean changing the laws. So a lot of times what you're going to see on TV when you see, 8 people arrested Spring Hill, Tennessee for human trafficking. But when you read the article and you look down, it was really 8 people were arrested because they responded to a prostitution ad. And they're going to go to court. They're going to plead out to prostitution, which is a misdemeanor. They're going to get slapped with a fine. So we really, if we want to be serious about these laws and eradicate the demand for sex trafficking, then we need to put some teeth on those laws. So reforming society by educating them and raising awareness so that these laws get passed so that we can do something in regards to that. So, hey, Rich, what is human trafficking? What's the legal definition? Well, we often use the Department of State's definition for human trafficking. When I say we, Hope for Justice, we created the training platform for the Department of State to educate all of their consulates abroad on how not just to recognize when we look for a trafficking victim, but how to screen them, how to interview them. So when we look at this, basically we can look at trafficking as obtaining a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Now, obtaining that person through labor services, sexual exploitation, or labor trafficking. Now, what does that mean, like common sense wise? What does that mean for us? How do they control their victims? Force, fraud, or coercion are the 3 elements that we look for in the law. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all 3 to meet that legal statute. It could just be one of the 3. Force, physical force, forcing that person to do this, whether through physical assault, forced substance abuse, restraint. A lot of times I'll hear people tell me, well, she's addicted to drugs or they're addicted to drugs. That doesn't make them less of a victim. A lot of times these traffickers use drugs as a means of control. Okay. Fraud, misrepresentation, meeting somebody and establishing a relationship with them, and then using that to manipulate them or through false promises, providing them an opportunity, a better opportunity than maybe what they had before, and then using that as leverage, debt bondage, coercion, physical intimidation, threats of serious harm to them, or maybe threats or harm to their family, okay, or confiscating their documents, or threatening them that, hey, I'll call the police and tell them that you were engaged in drug sales or prostitution, or you're here illegally into the United States. So basically buying or selling or trading someone for labor or services. But what we look for is that the common factor in all this, that common denominator, is vulnerability. And that vulnerability being exploited. So earlier, Jeff was introducing and he was like, me and my wife couldn't even believe that this was happening here. And there's no county in the state of Tennessee immune to this. There's no county across the globe that's immune to human trafficking. So let's kind of put a punch. Let's look at some of the statistics behind this. Okay, runaway and foster care victims are the most common pathway that we're starting to see. Almost half of those are forced into sexual exploitation. And when we look at 1.6 to 2.8 million runaways in the United States, and 55% of them being female, just do the math in your head. Numerous studies have shown us that the homeless range of individuals engaged or being trafficked 20 to 40%, 36% of runaways have traded sex for a place to stay. When we think about runaways. We think about them looking, engaging what we call survival sex. They're out on the street. They've got no food, no clothing, no money, nothing to turn to. And they engage in what we commonly use as survival sex. And then the next thing you know, they're being controlled through force, fraud, or coercion by that individual who is exploiting them. 83% of sextortion cases have happened over social media platforms. This is where we're starting to see a lot of the new trends when we're looking at sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. We know that, an upward of 60% of trafficking victims met their trafficker online. And when you hear me say females, it's not just young females who are being exploited. There are men too, but females make up the majority, 78% of sextortion victims. And if you don't know what sextortion is, it's basically extorting someone online for sexual purposes or gratification. So we've seen this increase almost 120% over the past year. A lot of times people say, well, do we think that the pandemic has really pushed this or gravitated kids into this sector? But, of course, COVID-19 really, put kids in an extremely vulnerable spot, forcing them to be online more than they had been before, as if that's even possible. But think about it, once kids now have gravitated to virtually everything online, it's hard to step them back from that. And every time you see a kid, I want you to think about where their face is engaged at. Normally, we used to walk down the street looking straight ahead, and the kids now are looking straight down at their phone. 90% of the kids today are on social media. So it's just a game of statistics. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center said there was a 100% increase in internet-based crimes against children over a year period. Okay. And then this is, as real as it gets. 82% of child predators learned about their victims' likes or interests through social media network sites. Think about how much young kids are actually sharing information online. It's as if a right to privacy doesn't exist anymore. And online predators know this. They go out there and they actually look for these children who are the most vulnerable. No chat room is safe. We've had victims that had met somebody in a Christian chat room on Facebook. So no chat room is safe from someone trying to exploit a child for sexual gratification or trafficking through that. One of the things that we know, 25 million victims in the world exist. 5 million victims are forced into sexual exploitation globally. But I want you to think about this figure, because this is with a B. It's $150 billion year business. And that's what the important thing is to recognize, is that this has become a business that makes a lot of money. So it's very difficult to stop something that's got this much momentum. So why is human trafficking like the second fastest behind drug trafficking? Because traffickers know they can only sell that drug once and then it's gone, but they can keep reselling that person over and over and over again. We once rescued a victim that had been sold over 20 times a day, 20 times per day. And traffickers realize that this is a reusable commodity to them. And the one thing that we have to start looking at is educating those industries that specifically intersect with trafficking victims, which is almost basically every industry now. When we look at the healthcare industry, for example, 88% of human trafficking victims said that they had come in contact with a healthcare provider at some point during their captivity. 88% had been to a healthcare facility and had gone unrecognized as a trafficking victim. So think about this. Think about the last time you visited with your healthcare professional, with your doctor, how long they stayed in that room with you. Did they have enough time not only to look for those factors, but screen you and ask questions that might lead to identification? 70% have received an evaluation at an emergency department. 70% of victims. Most juveniles are typically cast off by the juvenile system. Those that go in are mislabeled as teen prostitutes. And the way I look at it is, you can't really be labeled as a teen prostitute, because by law, if you're being prostituted out under the age of 18, it's considered human trafficking. Minors can't give consent. So there's no such thing really as a teen prostitute, but a lot of times they are discounted by the court system and by law enforcement, particularly runaways. When we look at these victims and we look at the ages that is of concern, for girls entering the sex trade is between the ages of 12 and 14. And, when I became involved with Hope for Justice almost 6 years ago, I realized I brought home a book with a picture of a 13-year-old girl on it. And this girl had been a victim of sex trafficking since the age of 6. And I put this book, it was an annual report for Hope for Justice, on my coffee table. And at that time, my 13-year-old daughter came bebopping down the stairs and she sits beside me on the couch. She picks up the book and she looks at me and she goes, "Hey, I was looking at this last night." And I was like, "You were?" And she was like, "Yeah." I was kind of surprised. I was like, "Oh." And she goes, "Is this something you think you're going to get involved with?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm thinking about it." And she goes, "Well, Dad, I'm very proud of you." And she leaned over and kissed me on the cheek. And my wife leans over from the kitchen and says, "I don't guess you're thinking about doing this anymore, are you?" And I felt like, no, I feel like I have that could be my daughter, that victim, that entrant age is my kid. And that person has a name, like Drew said at the beginning. These aren't just statistics. These are real names that are attached to this. This is somebody's daughter, somebody's granddaughter, somebody's sister, somebody's cousin, so this is real. It's really happening. Human trafficking cases up 185% over the past year. Now, when we look at this, we want to take, as a researcher, I always take statistics with a grain of salt, because when you look at these stats, you want to say, if human trafficking is underreported, okay, then what's the real number here? If it's underreported, a report just came out today. In fact, I was reading it this morning on the news that the Philadelphia Police Department underreported their crime statistics last year to the FBI's Uniform Crime Report by almost half. And I'm like, to make so their city wouldn't look as violent as it is, apparently, is what the media is saying, but we know what the media says. And when I look at that, I'm like, if everyone is underreporting this, how large is this number that we don't know about? National Center for Missing and Exploited Children said that there was a 90% increase of online enticement. So when we look at human trafficking, let's look at the sectors that we see human trafficking in. We know that there's forced labor. We know that there's sexual exploitation, and we know that there's domestic servitude. And we'll talk a little bit about this. Compelling someone to work for sub wages or no wages or debt bondage is forced labor. Sexual exploitation, we talked about that, compelling somebody for sex acts, and then domestic servitude, having somebody basically work as a slave for you, either someone from this country or other countries. So I want to display the myth that, this isn't about bringing illegal immigrants into the U.S. and victimizing them. Does that happen? Sure. But it's also about current U.S. citizens who are also being victimized. A lot of times when we look at this, people have this misconception of what human trafficking is because the way media and movies have perceived it. Everyone on here has probably seen Taken 1, 2, 3. And, when you look at how the media does it, sure, people do get kidnapped and forced into sexual exploitation. That is the rarest form of a pathway to enter human trafficking exploitation. Very rare. Hardly does that ever happen. So if you see it on TikTok, see it on Twitter, you see it on Facebook, that there's a zip tie on a shopping cart at Target, and that means you were going to be a target of a trafficking abduction, that's not true. Okay. So it's just a myth. So when we look at myths and facts, human trafficking involves the transportation of a person from one place to another. In fact, we've had victims who basically grew up on Harding Place in downtown Nashville and were trafficked on Harding Place in downtown Nashville. Victims don't have to be transported anywhere. It's not part of the definition for human trafficking when we look at that. The majority of human trafficking victims are women and young girls. That is true. Like I said before, it doesn't mean that boys are not and young men are not being exploited. It just means that a majority of the victims are females and young women being exploited. Any minor engaged in commercial sex act is a victim of human trafficking. True. Remember when we said earlier that there can really not be such a thing as a teenage prostitute because minors cannot give consent So that's rules that out. So also too, if they get paid, they're not victims. So myth, that's not true. So we worked a case where an individual from Nicaragua lived in Middle Tennessee, had a construction company in Tennessee, went back to Nicaragua and recruited some neighbors that had lived by his family that was down there to come to the United States to work. And they came here under the false promise that they were going to be given a better job. They were pulled to the U.S. for economic opportunity, a better opportunity for their family. And they were pushed out by violence, poverty, drugs, gangs, cartels. And when they got here, they were paid to work construction for this individual by the name of Lopez, and Lopez paid them. And at the end of the week, he deducted from their paycheck their transportation to and from work. He charged them $15 a week to use the outlet to charge their phone, charged them $30 a week to use the refrigerator, charged them $35 for the washing machine, $35 for the dryer. He charged them for everything. So at the end of the week, they had nothing. And they basically were like, how are we ever going to get ahead? And he's like, you have to pay off your debt to me for bringing you here first. So yeah, if they get paid, they are victims. If they're not getting paid what they should be paid. Okay. Smuggling someone across the border from Mexico into the United States is a form of human trafficking. Not true. That's human smuggling. And there's a big difference between the two. When we look at human trafficking and human smuggling, they're not the same. The key factor is voluntary. No one I know has ever raised their hand and said, will you please traffic me? But there are people that want to be smuggled into the U.S. For better opportunity because they're being pushed out of their country due to the reasons I said previously, and they're being pulled here because they want to give their family a better life. They want to give themselves a better life, their children's a better life, education, employment opportunity, less violence, free from poverty. So they're voluntarily coming here. Now, that doesn't mean once they do come here that they don't become exploited, because what we're starting to see emerge right now at the southwest border, and this is not an immigration debate, but we're starting to see people come in undocumented, which then leads them to become vulnerable to exploitation because they're paying smugglers around $10,000 to smuggle them into the U.S. And then once they're here, they have to pay that smuggler off. And they usually do that through forced labor or forced sexual exploitation. And that's what we're starting to see happen right there. And we know statistically that 67% of labor trafficking victims are Hispanic. So you can just put the two and two together to see that there's a huge gap of individuals who are extremely vulnerable to labor trafficking in that dimension. So now we look at push and pull factors, like what can push and pull somebody into trafficking. You know, it's 2022. Poverty shouldn't even exist anymore in our country, but unfortunately it does. So poverty is certainly a common variable that we look at. Grooming, we're starting to see this increase exponentially online, where people are starting to be groomed. And I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end of this presentation on online exploitation. But I'd interviewed a trafficker who was recruiting his victims online. And during the course of our interview, he was so proud of his technique. He was boastful to the point of the fact that he was like, Rich, before the pandemic, you know, I would cut and paste literally my conversation into a Word doc, and then I'd paste it into all of these different chat rooms and send it out. And I'd probably get 10 people reply to me. And he goes, during the pandemic, when people were at home, I was getting about 80 to 100% response rate. I couldn't even respond to all of them. And he goes, my script was so perfect. And then I would have a second paste that I'd put in there, and then a third paste. He goes, it used to take me roughly 2-3 weeks to groom a person online before I was able to establish their trust. Then during the course of the pandemic, and you know, this was during the pandemic last year when I was interviewing him, and he told me, he says, you know, now it's like I'm getting, you know, such a response rate from these individuals. It takes me about a week before I've established a trust bond with them. In fact, I've even had to cut some of them off because I just didn't have time. So grooming has increased exponentially. these individuals used to go to like runaway centers, homeless shelters, juvenile homes, game rooms, malls. Now they're just going online, and they've got this cornucopia of ways to exploit people or to groom people through the various different social media apps. Substance abuse. Obviously, individuals who have substance abuse problems are easily exploitable because of that vulnerability. And I had interviewed a girl one time who I'd asked her, I said, Heather, were you on heroin? Was that what really pushed you into this? Were you doing this for heroin? She says, no, actually, I became addicted to heroin after I was trafficked. One of the girls that was with me said, looks like you're having a tough time getting through your day. And she gave it to me. She goes, here, you take this. This will help you get through your day. And she goes, so I started taking heroin, and then just to get me through the day. And the next day I wanted it to get me through the day. And she goes, I was basically just wishing my days away. And then I became addicted. So not only was she dependent upon her trafficker physically because he was forcing her into sex trafficking, but she was chemically dependent upon him now. She wasn't going to leave him because he was giving her heroin, and that kind of kept her. So substance abuse, certainly. Instability, neglect of homes, runaways, homeless, foster. We talked about that earlier. There's one of the greatest vulnerabilities there is not having any stability or structure in your life, and not having a home to go to. And being a runaway, no food, no clothing, you resort to what we discussed in regards to the survival sex aspect of it. So, again, the pathways, abductions, extremely rare. That's just, very, very uncommon nowadays for that to happen. The online grooming rising at an exponential rate. How do you, a lot of people are like, well, where's law enforcement at? Why aren't they, how do you police the internet? Well, first of all, there's not one law enforcement agent for every person out there to monitor them, and then that whole Bill of Rights kind of issue is there too, that protects a lot of people with what they're able to do online. And it's just hard to monitor. And in fact, it's even difficult. Traffickers are now posting legitimate ads for modeling, or they'll go online, typical case scenario, true. They'll go online, they'll look at these girls who have insecure postings on their Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat accounts, and they'll start following them, and they'll start telling them how pretty they are. And then they'll tell them, you should be a model. Here, check out my website. I have a modeling agency, and they'll have a legitimate looking website that appears to be a modeling agency. And then one thing leads to another. The grooming process starts. I start taking pictures of them. Pictures become a little bit more risque. Then they start using these pictures as an extortion method, and then lure them down the pathway of trafficking. Responding to work ads to study or to work abroad. Those certainly happen. We talked about the smugglers seeking them into the country here, and then having that bondage that they owe them before they're able to pay that off. Dysfunctional family or dysfunctional relationships, domestic abuse, domestic violence, physical violence, sexual abuse, psychological, emotional difficulties. All of those obviously play a key role in a pathway. And when we talk about all of these, as we go through this and you see all of these variables that are in there, remember, it's just kind of like a chocolate cake. If I just give you flour, it doesn't mean you have a chocolate cake. If I just give you flour and water and eggs, you just got flour, water, and eggs right now. But as we start adding these ingredients, we start building that cake. So with these risk factors, the more risk factors we throw into the bowl and start mixing, the higher the propensity this person is to be a trafficking victim or to be exploited. So where is this happening? Everybody's like, where is it? Where does it exist? Well, it happens everywhere, basically. Escort services, online, the internet, obviously, hotels, motels, massage parlors. Roughly we know that not every massage parlor, so make sure I put this out there, not every massage parlor that's out there is selling sexual services. But we do know that there are over 25,000, and this is 25,000 illicit massage parlors that exist in the United States today. These individuals who are brought over here to work in these massage parlors speak very little English. They're brought over here under debt bondage and they're forced to work. So not only are they being sexually extorted, but they're also being labor extorted as well. And then brothels, Airbnbs. We're starting to see this trend on the rise. We're starting to see traffickers rent rent an Airbnb, use it as a brothel for the night, and then they're gone the next day. So leaving very little trail or clues for law enforcement. So a lot of you may or may not remember Backpage, much like Craigslist, online advertisement site where you can search by state, search by city within those states, much like Craigslist, where you could purchase a person or a grill, basically anything you wanted to on there. Well, the government realized that Backpage was being used to facilitate sex trafficking and labor trafficking. So through scale of investigation, they seized this webpage and shut it down. But then again, it is $150 billion a year business. So Backpage just reopened up under eBackpage on a foreign server, and now they use it through those means. So remember, it's $150 billion a year business. So people are going to keep it operating as best they can. So just a quick search. If you were to, this is this morning, obviously you can see down in the right-hand corner this morning where I just did a quick search on Google for escort services in Nashville, and you can clearly see the number of hits that came back when looking for escort services. So again, I pose the question: how do you police something this large? When we're looking at this number. So not to take away from the sex trafficking, but quickly look at labor trafficking. Where is that happening at? What industries do we see that in? Well, we see that in factories, migrant agriculture work, exotic dancing, magazine sales. The individuals that come to your house in the middle of the summer and knock on the door and say, hey, we're selling magazines for their sports group or whatever. Always ask them for their permit. Promise you they probably don't have one. Most of the time when these individuals come in to the neighborhood and they disperse these young kids to go out and sell, they're not getting any money for it. They're being forced to do this. Restaurant work, hotel, resort, housekeeping, food processing, construction, and landscaping. So all of these industries, we know that labor trafficking exists in those. And then domestic work, such as housekeeping, domestic, what we call them basically domestic slaves. It's so clandestine, it's extremely difficult to detect. You can't go knock on everybody's door and say, excuse me, do you have a domestic slave in here? And I'll tell you a story. This is a case study about a lady by the name of Lucazon. So Lucazon came to the United States from the Philippines. She answered an ad. She came here to be a nanny for a family in California. And when she did, she raised the kids. She slept on the concrete floor on a sheet in the garage, and she only got to eat what was left over from dinner. And I don't mean what the family didn't eat. I mean what was left on their plates. She had been to the hospital on 3 or 4 different occasions. Finally, she went to the hospital, and a nurse saw her that had received human trafficking awareness training, and she separated her from her trafficker and began talking to her and interviewing her. And come to find out, she explained to her the story. To speed this up a little bit, Mrs. Lucazon had been trafficked for 37 years. She was 78 years of age when we rescued her. She didn't even know how old she was. But how do you give back someone 37 years of their life? Extremely difficult to do, but there was a language barrier. She didn't speak English, and she didn't know any different. And this family exploited her for labor as a domestic slave for that many years. So when we're looking at labor trafficking, and we're looking at what are some of the signs that we want to look for when we look at labor trafficking, avoiding eye contact. If you see somebody in there, they won't make engaging eye contact. We look away. They appear to be fearful of their employer or fearful of the people that are around them, supervisor. Maybe they're not in control of their identification documents. Might have some untreated injuries or malnourishment they may have. usually transported to and from work. I know that people are like, oh, you mean the proverbial white van that brings people to work and then picks them up and takes them home? Yeah, it's a clue when they're transporting multiple people to one site and then back again. So lacking that, wears the same clothes over and over, repeatedly, doesn't speak English, maybe unaware of their surroundings and such. So when we talk about this, why aren't these individuals easily or easier identified? Because it's such a clandestine crime. They're not walking around with a t-shirt on that says I'm a trafficking victim, and the trafficker's not walking around with a shirt on that says I'm a trafficker. So it's extremely clandestine in the fact that it's a hidden underground. Traffickers are not parading these individuals around because they're keeping them away so they don't get identified. So what are some of the victims' red flags when we look at this? Typically, they're fearful and depressed, right? Submissive and tense, nervous, paranoid, fearful, anxious, exhibit some odd behavior, very resistant to care, that don't want to be treated for what's going on, and clearly have an addiction to drugs. I've met very few trafficking victims who have not had a substance abuse problem, whether it was what funneled them into trafficking or whether it was something that they did as a coping mechanism throughout the point of them being trafficked through this. So providing commercial sex acts. Okay, a lot of times these individuals will be individuals who are discounted as, oh, they're just a prostitute, or they're a hooker, or they're an escort, right? I would venture to guess that that's not the path that they chose as their career and were forced into this. They're unpaid or paid very little at all. They work excessively long hours. Think about this. The more hours they're working, the more money they're making for their trafficker. Unusual restrictions at work, owe a large amount of money and unable to pay that debt off. Avoid social interaction. Obviously, the trafficker doesn't want that person talking to you or engaging in conversation. And if they do, they give them scripted responses. If you're asked this question, this is how you respond. So think about it. Those of you who have teenagers, you know what a scripted response is. I have a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old, and I know what a scripted response is. I know it's been rehearsed. Dad asked me this is what I'm going to say. So same scenario with them. They attempt to much like domestic violence victims, they'll legitimize their bruises or their injuries. So that's important to look at, and then tattoos or branding signs. And I don't mean anybody has tattoos, a trafficking victim, but when we start looking at unusual tattoos, things that might be what we look at as more of a brand, because traffickers use tattoos as a way to brand their property. But it's two-way. It's a way for them to control their victim by letting their victim know that they are a piece of property. They have been branded. I own you. This is my trademark on you. So psychologically, it's there for the trafficking victim. So where are we heading with this? Live streaming of sexual exploitation, extremely concerning, particularly as we see this as an emerging threat for us right now. Traffickers are taking advantage of the more and more time kids are spending online unsupervised by their parents. And when I was a kid growing up, my mom and dad would always say, hey, listen, if a car pulls up outside you, and don't go up to the window, we don't know who they are. But yet today we're let our kids go up to this window, which goes much, much deeper than the car that pulls up outside the front of your house while you're playing. This can take you, to many different dimensions in countries. So when we look at that, girls are particularly vulnerable. 90% of those featured in online abuse are females or young girls, really. Like I said earlier, roughly 60% of trafficking victims in the US met their trafficker online before becoming trafficked. So when we look at some of these factors that play a big role into this, children who have been victims of sexual abuse, that kind of pushes them into being more vulnerable, particularly to online predators. Those children who have parents who have a high level of vulnerabilities, those children who are in particularly insecure about themselves or insecure about where they're going, and those who might have a family breakdown, those might be looking for some interaction that they're not getting at home because their parents aren't providing them with the attention. I mean, they're children. Children need attention. They need structure. And when they're not getting that, at home from their parents, and they're going to seek it elsewhere. It's just natural. So, and it kind of pulls them in there with the fact that they're online and they're being liked by somebody older than them, possibly somebody who they thought they may have never met before. That stranger enticement, that excitement. I was speaking at a high school in Herndon, Virginia. There's 2,500 students, and I asked them, I said, how many people in here have ever met somebody online that you didn't know before? Every one of them raised their hand. I was like, okay, how many of you ever met that person that you met online that you didn't know before in person? Over half raised their hand. And my heart like sunk, because I was thinking to myself, wow, my daughter's that same age. Thank you, Life 360. So, there are things obviously you could put in place to monitor, to help, to educate, to better, monitor your kids. But it's scary to know that as much as we try to protect our kids, it's often like when you tell your kids when they're driving, I'm not so concerned about you driving. I'm more concerned about the other people that are driving around you. That's like being on the internet. I'm not concerned about you being on the internet. I'm more concerned about the people who are trying to exploit you on the internet because they're out there. One of the biggest things that we're starting to see now is live streaming sexual abuse, where we're starting to see these individuals who are being extorted online. For example, this young girl here who was 14 years of age, who was convinced to do a strip show online. She was sextorted. Her perpetrator sold seats to men all around the world for her to perform live sex acts online, sold these seats. And she was literally trafficked for 2 years before she finally broke down and told her sister, who told her parents, who went to law enforcement roughly 4 months after the fact. So it's extremely concerning how this trend is emerging. This is a most recent case that I had worked here in Nashville. Actually, it was an individual. She was 12 years old. Her parents gave her a VR headset for Christmas. She was online playing with a person that she thought was a 14-year-old boy from the United Kingdom. She met him through this virtual reality quest. Then that moved to another gaming system. Then it went to Snapchat. Then it went to text messages. Then it went to phone calls. Her mom found some of this on her phone. We went out and looked at it. She was not talking to a 14-year-old boy at the end of the day. She was talking to a 44-year-old man from Scottsdale, Arizona, who just recently served 15 years in prison for kidnapping. And so, the mother had attended one of our training sessions, and she got concerned in regards to this. And yeah, it's very concerning because the 12-year-old girl thought she was talking to a 14-year-old boy from England. So when we look at some of these indicators, be aware of some of the signs or distress that you might have in your kids. When you look at it, look out for aggressive or secretive behavior. One of the key things now is we're starting to see where the trend is where a lot of kids will try to find that private space, which is usually in the bathroom. So if they're spending an obsessive amount of time using the restroom just so they can get that privacy on their phone, so no one can see them or hear them, if they become non-communicative with you or brash with you. Clearing internet history, clearly that's 101. I mean, you shouldn't be clearing your internet history unless you want somebody to look at it and know what you're looking at. So that's kind of a huge red flag. Changing their body behavior, things like that, behaving erratically and extremely secretive. So all online grooming indicators for us to look at when we're concerned about it. Why online recruitment? Because it's so much easier for traffickers. It's like shooting fish in a barrel for them. They know where to look for victims. Makes it so much easier for them to do this, to access people online. And when we talk about the anonymous nature of the internet, it becomes more and more scary knowing who's out there, but it's even worse not knowing who's not there. So some of the apps that you probably want to be concerned about, if a teenager has a dating app on their phone, that's probably not a good sign. Probably should look at that. A lot of these social media platforms are, whatever they invent by the end of the day or by the end of this training session is concerning, because it allows these kids the ability to talk to anybody, live stream with anybody, and it opens up the door for people becoming exploited. So who do you call? I mean, obviously, if it's an imminent danger, you should call 911. I mean, if it's imminent and you think somebody's in immediate danger, you should contact 911. If not, you get contact, your local law enforcement and report it. Obviously, you can contact us. We have our own investigative units that across the country that actually work with law enforcement and work with and coordinate that and deconflict that with them. And then also to, you can email us at the email address. So basically preventing, rescuing, restoring, and reforming. That's what we're really about in regards to trying to educate you, to protect you and to protect your family. That's one of the key things in blocking that pathway is to prevent it through education. So I appreciate the opportunity to do that with you guys today. I'm going to end the screen share and at this time turn over to Jeff and Drew and field any questions if you guys got any.
Great. Richard, thank you. If you've got questions, there's the Q&A button there, or we'll spend a few minutes here asking questions, and then Drew's going to kind of have a little bit of a need that they've are asking for our help with. But Richard is a father of 4 kids. Thing that scares me is I'm familiar with maybe a third of those apps you just had on there, but it's crazy how hard it is. I bought a new iPhone a couple of years ago, and it took me an hour to figure out how to protect it from, the kids getting on there and finding some crazy stuff. So it's fascinating that Apple doesn't make that easy for people to. I think everybody's phone, if they buy it, they can get anything that they want to see, unless the parents do a pretty proactive approach to blocking that. But it seems like having some apps, and we've got a couple at home, but I need to do a better job of adding our virtual reality game thing to that to protect it. But is there a website or app or something that how do parents, because it seems almost hopeless, but I know it's not, but we got to just do what we can. But these phones are super scary. Do you have a suggestion there on what?
Yeah, at our website, the www.hopeforjustice.org, we have a lot of educational information that will educate you how to take your phone and how to set the privacy settings on it. And how to, you have to look at it this way. Nobody's looking out for your kids like you are. Okay. These companies that are marketing all these are marketing these to make money, and they're not in the business of protecting our kids. We are. That's what we're here for. We're parents, and that's what we need to do. And it's hard to say that you want to give your kids independence and you want them to expand on their thought process and their cognitive ability and be able to do all this, knowing what we know that's out there, right? So we just got to do a better job educating our kids that, hey, listen, I trust you. It's the people that are out there that I don't trust. And you want to make sure that when they are online and they are playing games online, that they're playing games with known knowns, people that they know. It's somebody from their school, somebody that family, friends, etc. Because the 14-year-old boy that's on there talking to your 12-year-old girl, more chances than not, he's probably not 14 unless he goes to her school. We did a social media experiment with one of our investigators not too long ago, where we created a username that was a 12-year-old girl, and with a matter of 48 hours, we had already had 5 people try to groom her online, and we weren't even engaging in the conversation. We were just actually out there floating. And he had found the name and then started sending them text messages. So it's that scary that there's that level of perpetrators out there.
Well, it's terrifying, but I guess what we can do is spread the message, be on the lookout, and then obviously try to share this story with people closest to us. Drew, what can we do to help?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Richard. Every time I speak to Richard or the other investigators at Hope for Justice, I'm just in shock about the evil that exists in this world as a father of 6. I believe it was Edmund Burke who said the only thing necessary for triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And today is a powerful opportunity for you to do something and take action on what you've just learned and help with a specific tangible need. So Richard and our team of investigators are in need of a surveillance vehicle. We actually need 3 of these at our hubs across the country, but we're starting with Nashville. And what we're talking about is a van outfitted with surveillance equipment for investigations, gathering evidence of trafficking activity. And the team, they're currently using their personal vehicles for stakeouts and surveillance, which has just many potential pitfalls. And this surveillance vehicle will provide safety and protection for our investigators working cases in Nashville and across Tennessee, as well as expand and amplify capacity. So the estimated cost for the purchase and equipping one is $50,000. And Mr. Jeff Dobines has stepped up to not only provide this platform, but also to make this a reality by matching the giving from this today. So I'm asking the rest of you on the call to help close the gap and make this surveillance vehicle a reality. We're going to put a donation link in the chat. And if you'd like to give from your DAF or check, if you could please email Nicole on Jeff's team. I believe we can get this funded today. I'm also going to be putting my email and phone number in the chat. And if you would like to follow up in any way, please do. But while I'm doing that, and we have a couple more minutes left, Richard, would you like to share briefly what adding a surveillance vehicle would mean to the team and mission of Hope for Justice?
Yeah, certainly, Drew. I think, having worked surveillance during the course of my entire career with the FBI and the National Counterterrorism Center, having a vehicle that enables you to do and conduct covert surveillance is extremely important. A lot of the information that we gather is through observation, is observing others, observing, hotspots, hotels that are being used in Nashville as places where people are exploiting people, where they're sending prostitutes to engage in commercial sex acts, watching these illicit massage parlors that are engaging in illicit sex acts, watching these work sites that are where labor trafficking victims are present. It's not easy with a couple guys sitting in a car with tinted out windows. Obviously they know who you are, and they know that you're probably law enforcement or something. But having a van that would enable us to be a chameleon and change the panels on the side as to what service provider that we are, whether it's home inspection or AC, HVAC, or you name it, we can be anybody that you want to be, with a laminate sticker on the side that enables us to be a little bit more clandestine and then record these activities so that we can identify patterns of high intensity crime areas. It's extremely important for us to have that vehicle to do that.
Well, when we heard about this a while back, the need for the vehicle, that seems like a no-brainer, something we can do. So our company wanted to sponsor that. And so we appreciate anything you can do to help. We'll match it dollar for dollar, and we're going to try to raise the van here shortly for Hope for Justice. So Richard, I was just struck by, as we kind of wrap up here, that's a pretty powerful example of your daughter seeing you live this out every day. And it's got to be a brutal job for you and the rest of the investigators, but give us the 30 seconds on how you even handled that.
I'll tell you, it's very, for me, it's a rewarding job to go out and be able to provide assistance to families, I hate to say what I would do on a recorded air if I found some 44-year-old man talking to my daughter. I'd probably be like Liam Nielsen. But when you think about it and you think about the dangers, it really puts in perspective. I mean, this mother was actually a school counselor, so she's seen this all the time. And this is her 12-year-old kid, and she gave her the tool that enabled her to meet a trafficker, unbeknownst to her that's what was going to happen. And it's scary because you think you're giving your kid an educational platform to go out and learn and go out and do things, unbeknownst to you that there's people out there that are looking for a vulnerability to try to exploit that kid. And that's what we have to do as parents, as community members, is police ourselves, is to educate ourselves on the dangers that exist, and then talk to our kids about it, so that they know that they're not as vulnerable, or they're a little bit less vulnerable because they're less naive to the dangers that exist out there.
Yeah, well, that's super scary that you would think these are kids that get involved with this have derelict parents, but you've got a school counselor who's pretty dialed in, more so than I am probably, on how to read kids, and yet her child's being groomed. It's terrifying. So, well, on behalf of all of us, thank you for the work you do every day. This is not, it's got to be pretty painful for you to do, and Drew, for all your work. Two questions. One, Judy asked, will the donation to Hope for Justice be given towards a vehicle? Yes. So if you would just email us or give us a call, we're going to aggregate all this, and then you guys send your checks or have us do it from your donor advised fund, and we'll send our check from the company to match. We do have a recording, so we'll send it out to everybody who's signed up today. And if you could share it with your family or friends and just expand, what's been neat is just kind of watching this evolution of education with Hope for Justice in Nashville expand, and the more that we can get involved, the better. Last question from Rebecca: is there training for kids or something you'd recommend for kids? Because do they teach this in school, or how to be kind of aware of what's happening?
Well, I will say that, this is supposed to be taught in school system by Tennessee state law. My wife's a school teacher, and all teachers are required to get the education on it. Now, does that happen? I can tell you firsthand from being a father with kids in school and being married to a teacher that no, it doesn't happen. And so we really need to put it back onto the families and educate our kids at home. There are online training platforms. We literally just developed one this past week that focuses specifically on the online dangers of not just social media, but the gaming apps as well, because a lot of people think it just happens on Facebook, or it just happens on Snapchat, or it just happens here. It happens across every app platform that's out there. And, it's obviously hard to monitor all of them, but, raising the awareness with your kids is an important thing to do. So I'll have Drew email out that link to the training, and he can take it from there, that you guys can all have access to.
Okay, that'd be great. And Connie asked for the phone number. Would you give it again? If somebody identifies or suspects a victim, Drew, what's the website?
The hopeforjustice.org is the website, and the phone number's on there. I don't know it offhand. Do you know,
Okay.
Richard?
Yes. So our phone number would be 615-356-0946. I'm getting ready to post this in the chat for you guys to have. And then
Thank
you should be. Yep.
Great.
Yeah. And I would love to report back to everyone, all 70 of you who were on this today, which is just unbelievable, the outcome and impact of today's efforts. We're compelled by God's love to fight the world's greatest injustices, and just remember the horrible stats and numbers that you heard earlier, and remember that every number has a name and every name matters. And we're seeking to make a world where all children can live innocent lives, really.
Well, we appreciate it. Takes a team here. So we got our clients and team members out here doing their deal, and we're supportive. And we just want to say thanks for what you guys are doing every day, Drew and Richard.
Thank you so much for the support.
Keep up the good work, and we appreciate everybody's time and help, and we'll send out some updates.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks. Have a sensational.
Bye-bye.
Bye.